Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of the Bay Area Beat. I hope you all had a great start to your week. Hopefully, some fun Super Bowl parties mixed in there. I know for myself that watching the Warriors the last couple nights, particularly after their 24-point second half comeback against the Bulls, has given me some new life and optimism of what a Steph, Jimmy, Draymond combo could really look like. I said last week that we're going to mostly focus on the Niners today, and we are. I just want to open up with a few thoughts about the early returns on the Jimmy Butler trade. My main takeaway from watching the Dubs since Butler's debut against the Bulls is just how starkly different Steph, Draymond, and Jimmy's games are, and how that actually complements them just so well. Steph had back to back vintage performances, dropping 34 in Chicago and following up with 38 in Milwaukee, and showing that with real weapons around him, taking some of the burden off him, that he still is Steph Curry after all. Jimmy was doing everything inside, constantly attacking the paint and drawing defenders away from shooters while consistently getting to the free throw line, which is where the Warriors are currently dead last in the NBA. As a matter of fact, his 28 free throws attempts in his first two games are actually the most by a Warrior since Durant had 30 in November 2018, more than 6 years ago. The pressure that Jimmy puts on a defense has also empowered his teammates and has given them more open looks. Not only does Steph look like he's regained confidence in this team, but the young guys and Pods, Moses Moody, and now even second round rookie Quentin Post are all playing their best basketball of the season. Podziemski in particular has been terrific in his do-it-all role, even leading the team in plus minus off the bench the last two games, while Post in his limited minutes has been awesome to watch as the Dubs' first stretch five since Mo Spates. If the kid can ever figure out a way to play just a bit of defense and not be a turnstile, he has a real future on this team. Not to mention, we haven't even seen what Kuminga is going to look like playing the power forward position and having more one-on-one opportunities than he's ever had in his career. I cannot wait to watch him on this new look Warriors team. Now, as pumped as I am about the Dubs, and as they've quickly become appointment television, let's hop into the Super Bowl, the Deebo trade request, and what it really all means for the Niners. So while I was watching the Super Bowl that was the bloodbath of Super Bowl 59, I had my heart with the Eagles, while unfortunately I had my money with the Chiefs. Although I was glad to see Kansas City fail their pursuit of their first ever three-peat, I couldn't help but feel semi-depressed reminiscing about the year prior and all the opportunities the Niners had to win against this very same Chiefs team. I kept thinking back to Greenlaw tearing his Achilles running onto the field, and how he was playing out of his mind the first quarter and a half, and how good the rest of the defense looked all the way up until that point. People forget that the Chiefs punted or turned the ball over in 5 of their first 6 possessions of that Super Bowl, and it took a Ray McCloud muff punt in the third quarter for the Chiefs to score their first touchdown of the game. Watching the Eagles flat out dominate the Chiefs in all 3 phases, but most notably on both sides of the line, further solidified to me how flawed Kansas City was, and how if the Niners simply just played a B+ game and not shot themselves in the foot over and over again, that they should have ended the night hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. This year's Eagles-Chiefs Super Bowl to me was so hard to watch, and not just because I lost money betting on the Chiefs or even the blowout leading to a relatively boring game, but because I had PTSD watching the Eagles properly take care of business in what should have been the Niners just a season ago. Now, with all that being said, getting the hard part out of the way with, I also think this game gave the Niners a blueprint of how they can get back there next season. Coming into this past season, the Eagles were coming off their own Super Bowl hangover from the year prior when they too, had a devastating loss against the same Chiefs. Knowing they needed to make some major changes, the Eagles reset both their coordinators and hired defensive guru and former Niners defensive coordinator during the Harbaugh era, Vic Fangio, as their DC. They also rebuilt their weakest positional groups bringing in Zach Bond as the captain of their defense, alongside drafting Cooper DeJean in the secondary, both of whom had the interceptions in the Super Bowl. And just as a sidebar, DeJean was sitting there at pick 31 last year when the Niners picked in the first round, and was who I personally wanted them to take, and even wrote a small blurb about it last year on Twitter, but I digress. Other than some coaching and positional upgrades, this Eagles team was largely the same team that got blown out in the wild card round last year. Now, is this starting to sound familiar at all? This Niners team, this 2025 Niners team, had the same fate against the Chiefs in the hangover aftermath, but they started their offseason, just like the Eagles, by rehiring a familiar face in Robert Saleh to be their defensive coordinator. Saleh, who was the Niners defensive coordinator during their 2020 Super Bowl run, largely behind his unit being the best in the league, now returns to the Bay after being plagued with the Jets' curse the last 3 seasons in New York. Like Fangio, Saleh builds his defenses around creative, unique ways to bring pressure to the quarterback, all without having to blitz. And sure, it's a cliche as old as time, but if there's any takeaway from watching the Eagles absolutely manhandle the Chiefs, is that defenses, more importantly, defensive lines, do win championships. The Eagles' D-line was harassing Mahomes all game long. They didn't even have to blitz one time in the game to get that pressure. In fact, in the 2 Super Bowls Mahomes has lost, both this year against the Eagles as well as the Bucs in 2021, both in which he got absolutely embarrassed, mind you, he went up against elite front fours that gave him 0 time to get through his progressions. If the Niners want to finally get over the hump, it starts with retooling their defensive tackles and edges. Luckily for them, they have their franchise cornerstone, Nick Bosa, already there. They just need to build the pieces around him. Some of the parallels between this year's Eagles team and next year's Niners team is truly uncanny, and is a great source of optimism for me and the rest of Niner fans out there. I already convinced myself to put a few bucks on the Niners to win the Super Bowl at 16-1. So if anyone wants to join me, by all means. But this isn't to say the Niners aren't going to have their uphill battles. Their defense may look quite different next year, with safety Talona Hufanga, corner Charvarius Mooney Ward, D-tackle Javon Hargrave, and outside linebacker Dre Greenlaw, all slated to hit free agency, along with starting offensive guard Aaron Banks. Fortunately, the team is projected to have roughly $48 million in cap space, roughly the 8th most in the league. I expect the Niners to move on from Hargrave, who tore his tricep in week 3 and was cut as the Niners' first move of free agency, as well as, unfortunately, Charvarius Ward, who made it clear at the end of last season that he likely needs to leave San Francisco, and all the associated memories he has of his late daughter, who passed away this past October. It goes without saying that the unimaginable tragedy Ward and his family face goes head and shoulders above football. I think I speak for any Niner fan when I say I hope Mooney finds a place that brings him peace. He will always be held in the highest regard in San Francisco as an amazing human, a caring father, as well as an instrumental member of the 2023 NFC Championship team as an All-Pro that season. But going back to the Niners offseason, they certainly have some holes to fill, which has only grown recently, with Deebo Samuel now requesting a trade for the 2nd time in his career. Frankly, as much as I loved Deebo, particularly early in his career as a Swiss Army knife, both lining out wide as the X receiver, as well as in the backfield where he was arguably Shanahan's most effective runner pre-Christian McCaffrey, I'm kind of sick of his diva antics. Deebo first asked for a trade in 2022 following the Niners' 2nd straight trip to the NFC Championship game in their 3rd in 4 years. Of course, all this was him just playing hardball, and to his credit, he eventually worked as the Niners extended Deebo later that offseason, giving him a 3-year, $72 million deal that would include a $31.5 million dead cap hit if the Niners do decide to cut or trade him before the June 1st of this year. They could also designate his release after June 1st, but before his $23 million option is due on March 23rd. And That way they could spread the cap hit over the next 2 years, reducing it to 11 million per year rather than the big 30 million number. And look, I get it if all this cap stuff is going over your head. It took me hours of diving into it to fully grasp all the intricacies and scenarios. It's a reason why not everyone can be an NFL GM as much as they think so from playing Madden. But reading through the tea leaves, my takeaway is that this is going to be a very long, drawn out process and that Deebo really isn't going anywhere anytime soon. If they were to trade him in the next couple months, they would have to eat the full cap hit, bring in their projected cap space from 50 to closer to 35 million, which would impede their ability to bring back guys like Greenlaw, like Hufunga, guys that I think the Niners really do want to and plan to bring back this offseason. Not to mention, it's unlikely that Deebo at 29 years old and coming off his worst season of his career would fetch anything more than a 4th-round pick at best. Despite CMC and Ayuk only playing 3 and 6 games respectively, Deebo had by far his least amount of scrimmage yards per game last season. He led the team in drops with 9 and was clearly Brock Purdy's third option behind George Kittle and Jawan Jennings. The best outcome for the Niners is to use Deebo's contract and an early draft pick to get one of these disgruntled superstars. I've heard Tyreek Hill's name mentioned, as the Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniels has a relationship from Deebo from his days as the offensive coordinator with the Niners and knows how to properly use his skill set. Not to mention, Deebo did have his best game last season against the Dolphins in Miami. Devontae Adams is another veteran receiver who could be on the move, as the Jets seem to be parting ways with his buddy Aaron Rodgers, and Adams, who is from Palo Alto, has voiced his desire to return to the West Coast. Adams still has 2 years left on his deal, making $36 million a year. His expensive contract makes him a less likely Niners candidate, especially when you take into account Deebo's dead cap. But he'd also cost far less in return, as part of the package with him is his high salary. But I think, while all 3 scenarios do sound exciting, I don't think trading for another veteran receiver is what this team needs. Ayuk, while recovering from his knee injury, is still expected to make a full return at some point next season and should be close to 100% come what is hopefully a Niners playoffs. But the Niners also invested in 1st-round pick and slick Ricky Pearsall just last season, and he showed signs of real development towards the end of his rookie year last year. Not to mention their 2 leading receivers last year, both George Kittle and Jawan Jennings, are still under contract in the 2025 season. Now, the dream scenario to me is the Niners take Deebo, their 11th overall pick in this draft, maybe not another top pick, whether it's a 1st or 2nd, and go out and get the big fish in Myles Garrett, who last week requested a trade from Cleveland. Both Fred Warner and George Kittle actually spent a lot of their Super Bowl week last week recruiting Garrett as the perfect player to pair alongside Bosa and the rest of the defensive line. Tim Kawakami, who reports on the Niners for the SF Standard, suggested that this is a go for broke type season for the Niners. If they truly want to put all their chips on the table, go all in for this last season before Brock Purdy's mega contract extension is on the books, this is the type of move that could put them over the edge, and one that fits the Eagles mold of building around the defensive line. This also wouldn't be the first time the Niners have gone after a superstar edge rusher, as David Lombardi reported that in 2018, they made actually a better offer to the Raiders for Khalil Mack, but owner Mark Davis refused to trade to the Niners, as at the time they were their local rival. It's funny to think just a couple of years later, now the Raiders being in Vegas. But as a separate note, to add to a long list of things that keep me up at night, the Niners actually could have had Myles Garrett in 2017, had then coach Chip Kelly not won a meaningless December game just weeks before being fired. Now, there are going to be a lot of suitors for Garrett, don't get me wrong, and the Browns as of now have said publicly they're not moving him, but then again, GMs lie all the time about their front office plans. While teams like the Bills, I've heard the Lions, most notably the Commanders, are all expected to be in the running for Myles, what the Niners have as an advantage compared to those teams is a 1st-round pick in the top half of the draft. Trading Garrett to one of those other teams would likely result in 2 first rounders, but both would probably be in the high 20s as both teams are expected to be playoff teams next year as well. If the Browns do decide to fully commit to their rebuild, which I do think they should, considering Garrett alone doesn't make them a contender, and having 2 picks in the top 12 would jumpstart that same rebuild, I'm all for the Niners giving up 1, if not even 2 first rounders for Myles. Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, frankly, do not have a great track record when it comes to first rounders. You think Trey Lance, Solomon Thomas, Javon Kinlaw, all these guys only strengthen the argument to go after Garrett. Not to mention that the Niners would only be paying Myles $15 million this year and $25 million next year, a steal for a player of his caliber, and would ultimately make Deebo's cap hit all that more palpable. So I know the Niners' biggest offseason move is what they'll eventually do with Brock Purdy and what type of contract extension he might get. I certainly want to get into that in future episodes. We're just so fresh off the Super Bowl and the Deebo and Myles Garrett trade requests that I wanted to dive into those first. But don't worry, Brock, we haven't forgot about you. We'll talk more about what that contract may look like in the coming weeks. And stay with me, Giants fans. I know pitchers and catchers just reported. I'm fired up for a new season, and I'm sorry we haven't had the time yet to discuss their offseason moves and look ahead to the 2025 season. We will get there, I promise. Thanks for everyone for listening. Until next time, peace.